We'll turn the time over to Heather now and to introduce our last speaker of the conference. Thanks.
Professor of Ophthalmology and Visual Sciences at the John A. Moran Eye Center and the University of Utah, and he's the director of the Himalayan Cataract Project. Thanks. He is a corneal specialist and director of the Division of International Ophthalmology at the University of Utah. He completed his undergraduate education at Yale, then earned his master's degree in philosophy at Oxford as a Marshall Scholar, and then his MD from Harvard Medical School. He is the fourth person to climb the 7 summits, the highest point on each continent, all 7 continents. He's the fourth person to climb the 7 summits. Dr. Taben has pioneered difficult rock, ice, and mountaineering routes on all 7 continents, including the east face of Mount Everest. He is the author of Blind Corners, Adventures on Everest and the World's Tallest Peaks. It was published by the Lions Press in October 2002. And in 1994, he co-founded the Himalayan Cataract Project, which strives to eradicate preventable and curable blindness in the Himalaya through a quality ophthalmic care, education, and establishment of a world-class eye care infrastructure. Please help me to welcome Dr. Taben.
Well, thank you very much. I know it's been a long meeting. I'm the last speaker, so hopefully we'll make this an enjoyable last little bit. First, I have unfortunately, no ophthalmic financial disclosures, although I have received equipment support from the North Face, Black Diamond, Mountain Gear, Osprey packs. I'm going to start with a couple words about Everest. Actually, Ogden is kind of has a lot of meaning to me because one of the people who really helped change my life in a lot of ways was a climber from Ogden named George Lowe. I don't know if many of you remember his father, George, who was a surgeon here in Ogden. And so I'm actually going to mainly focus on what we're doing to try and eradicate world blindness, but as sort of a tribute to the Lowe family. I'm going to backtrack a little bit into mountaineering and also the sort of course that brought me to where I am. I'm going to start talking for a few minutes about Mount Everest. This is Mount Everest, the highest point on our planet. It's a 3-sided pyramid on the border between Nepal and Tibet called Chomolungma by the people who live in the mountain's shadow. It was first discovered by outsiders by the British Survey of India. And they used just trigonometry coming up from the Bay of Bengal and were able to find the mountain's height to within actually 20 feet of its actual height just using trigonometry. And they called it Peak 15. It was later renamed Mount Everest after Sir George Everest, who'd been the Surveyor General of India. And then the British again were the first with the audacity to think it could or should be climbed. And here in the front row is George Lee Mallory, whose name became synonymous with the early attempts at Everest. And they made this topographic map. And those of you who look at corneal topography or go hiking in the woods and look at topographic maps, the closer together the lines are, the steeper the surface. And you can see that by far the largest and steepest side of Everest is the eastern side, or Kangshung face of Mount Everest. Mallory felt, certainly by the means of 1921, it was impossible. He concluded other men less wise might attempt this way if I would, and emphatically it was not for us. They came around to the north, and this is looking at the north, and Mallory along with an Oxford undergraduate named Andrew Irvine, disappeared on this ridge beyond this last step going towards the summit. And there's still some controversy over whether they made it to the top before they perished. But as a climber, it doesn't really matter, because when you climb, getting to the top is optional, but getting down is mandatory. And they didn't get down. The first descent went along this right-hand skyline ridge on Coronation Day 1953 by Sir Edmund Hillary and Tenzing Norgay Sherpa. And by 1983, virtually the entire mountain had been climbed from two-thirds. So from everything from two-thirds of the mountain had been climbed, and they climbed in winter, climbed during the monsoon, but no outsider had looked at the eastern side of Everest. Now, me, I was just a kid who liked to climb. I was a pretty fanatical rock climber as a teenager, climbed a lot during high school. My main focus was kind of big wall climbing. I did a lot of routes in Yosemite and was always kind of looking for big wall routes. I did a little bit of ice climbing in the East Coast and a little bit of moderate mountaineering. But the thing that really changed my life and really changed my perspective, because I'd already been accepted to medical school and I was kind of thinking about sports medicine, planning to be an orthopedic surgeon, and I had this 2-year fellowship to go to Oxford University. And I looked at comparative healthcare systems, and I read philosophy, but I focused on the morality of healthcare delivery and also looked at the economics of healthcare delivery around the world and began thinking in terms of a broader picture and what I might be able to do internationally. Moreover, Oxford had an 8-week term followed by a 6-week break, then an 8-week term followed by a 6-week break, then an 8-week term, and then a 3-month break. And the scholarship paid for 2 years, all expenses. And what was more, Oxford had these indigenous trust funds that were remnants of the days when Oxford students were supposed to civilize various aspects of the world. So basically I had 28 weeks of paid climbing holiday a year for 2 years. And I began to explore a little bit and found the more exotic of a locale we could choose, the more cash money we get. And we were very lucky with weather. I had a great partner, and we weren't really the best 21-year-old climbers in the world, but we were the only ones who were going to these kind of remote areas, who had big wall experience. And we got lucky on a couple of climbs. And I was in my first year of medical school when I got a phone call from George Lowe, who was the surgeon George Lowe's son, and one of the premier American climbers, and said, we've got an expedition going to the east face of Mount Everest to make the first climbing attempt. Would you like to go? And I got all excited, and George came out. We climbed together at my local area on the East Coast. And, when you take someone to your local area and you know the routes and you kind of know, you've done them before, you can appear a little bit better maybe than you are. And George and I hit it off really well. And I got invited as the alternate for the expedition. They were looking for a younger climber, looking for a little geographic distribution. And they ended up choosing David Brashears, who some of you may know from the Everest IMAX movie. And ended up that the team was just about to leave. I called the people on the team and said, thank you very much for considering me. It was just great to climb with you, and maybe we'll climb another time. Then someone broke their leg, and at the last minute I left, and we went to the east face of Everest. And the only problem was I was a last-minute substitute, and I was in August, and this was in the days when there wasn't email. And I flew out all excited. I was kind of like, wahoo! All my climbing buddies were all going, yeah, wahoo! And the last minute I realized I hadn't informed my local medical school. So I sent them a postcard from the airport in San Francisco saying, going to the last unclimbed face on Everest, we'll call when I get back, love, Geoff. And we went on, went through Taben, our first view of Everest, amazing hike, and for me, just walking through these glistening, unclimbed, unattempted 24,000 foot peaks was incredible. We got to the east face. It was in the autumn season. It was a late monsoon. We had very bad weather, lots of avalanches. And after 6 weeks of climbing, we only figured out basically the route on the first 6,000 feet, and we only got to a high point of about 23,000 feet. And so we were 6,000 vertical feet below the summit. On the way out, I actually spent a couple of weeks with George climbing some routes that had never been, or some mountains that had never been climbed in that area. And it was a great trip, and I came back and ended up being a few weeks late for my second year of medical school, which caused quite a fuss, and I had to go before a faculty committee to explain why I did what I did and why I acted so impetuously. And then about two-thirds of the way through my second year of medical school, I got called again by George Lowe from Ogden, and he said, we're going back. We have National Geographic sponsorship. Are you with us? And I said, absolutely, but this time I'm going to go for an official leave of absence. And I sent in an application for a leave of absence, and a few weeks later I got a phone call in the evening from a guy. He said, is this Geoff Taben? I said, yes. And he said, you're an idiot. And I said, excuse me? He said, you're a complete moron. I said, excuse me? He said, I cannot believe Harvard Medical School has ever accepted anyone as stupid as you. And I said, who is this? He said, well, my name's Professor Mike Weidman, and I'm on the committee that looks at leaves of absences from medical school, and there's zero chance that you would ever get a leave of absence to climb again. But anyone with half the intelligence to get into this school should know that if you apply to do research, Harvard will give you credit and probably some funding. And I happen to be an ophthalmologist interested in whether the effects of high altitude on the retinal vasculature can be used as a prognosticator of high altitude cerebral edema. And let's talk about your research project tomorrow. So this was my research team. And those of you who know, it was an amazing little boondoggle, because I took a photo of everyone before the expedition, took a picture of their retina during the expedition, and then after the expedition. So 3 sets of photos, 3 months credit. And those of you who knew him, this is George Lowe from Ogden here. And we went back. Our route basically went following pretty much the center of this buttress up to this ridge line and on up to the summit. This is George about 1,000 feet up. The first 1,000 or 1,500 feet was fairly straightforward rock climbing, and that led to this first camp on the mountain. But then we had this unconsolidated ridge line that we followed up to our one sort of comfortable camp on the face. And we had an overhanging rock head wall. We had a phenomenal team. 12 out of 12 climbers went above 25,000 feet without supplemental oxygen. And 6 of my teammates completed the first ascent of the east face of Mount Everest. This was 1983. The route has never been repeated. The face has never been climbed again. And this was from 1983. Carlos Bueller, Kim Mom, Lou Reichart, Dan Reed, Jay Cassell, and George Lowe were the ones who made the summit. I wasn't quite as strong, but it was a great trip for me. This is now Lou on the summit. And I came back, and Professor Weidman really tried to get me to go into ophthalmology, but I had this idea. One of the things when you're traveling, or when I was traveling in the developing world, that I saw quite a lot of were crippled kids. And I was thinking I want to do something for kids with malunions, bad healing fractures, and I started actually a residency in orthopedic surgery. And I was 2 years into my orthopedic residency, and there were a couple of things. One, I wasn't really seeing a clear way to do what I wanted to do internationally through orthopedics. And then I didn't just have this overwhelming passion for what I was doing in orthopedics. And it's sort of interesting in terms of who you meet. I don't know if there are there some orthopedic surgeons in the audience here who are still here late? Because there's a guy named Joe Serra, who I met later on, who's been working with polio kids, particularly in Africa, and doing tendon lengthening. And had I met him, I'm sure I would be working with him doing tendon lengthening. But I just didn't see where what I wanted to do internationally was fitting in with my orthopedic training. And I also didn't get to the top of Everest, which kind of sat in the back of my mind. And I ended up getting a leave of absence in my orthopedic residency to go back as a doctor on an expedition returning to Everest, which was funded to get the first American woman to the top of Everest in 1988. And we would be following the much easier sort of traditional route up that right-hand skyline ridge, the southeast ridge. We had 4 very strong women on our team, as well as some very strong men. We also have a full Sherpa team. We walked in during the monsoon to take advantage of a window of better weather just after the monsoon. We wore these nylon tights, not so much to get in touch with our feminine side and bond with our female teammates, but to keep off the leeches. This is actually a leech. I wrote a poem about it. I sent it to the New Yorker, but they didn't actually publish it. It's called Leech on My Dingus by Jeffrey Tabin. And probably you haven't had a lot of poetry recitals at the Ogden Medical and Surgical Society, but if anyone is likely to get offended, please throw it, eat fruit or whatever. Leech on my dingus, leech on my dingus, you gave me quite a scare this morning before breakfast when I found you there. I even wore nylons to keep you away, but they ran at the crotch hiking yesterday. Leech on my dingus, you crawled in through that hole and made a beeline straight for my pole. Why is it I that must suffer the hacks of an engorged leech feeding at my sex? Leech on my dingus, I don't wish to be intimate anymore. To me you are nothing but a blank-sucking whore. And no matter how much you suck my dingus, I will never reciprocate with leecholingus. Anyways, we moved up, and I won't say too much about the standard route, through the Khumbu Ice Fall. We had great weather. When you're a team doctor on a trip like this, I mean, really your whole focus is on keeping people healthy and preventing injuries. We had a great team. Everyone stayed very healthy. We had a period of 10 days of perfect weather up the Lhotse face. This is our high camp. This is Stacy Allison, who became the first American woman to climb to the summit of Everest. And 2 days later, I joined Sherpa Nima Tashi and Pasang Gelson, along with the second American woman, Peggy Luce. Beautiful, kind of classic mountaineering day. So almost an embarrassingly easily nice day. It's fairly straightforward ridge. Just the last little obstacle called the Hillary Step. And it's looking down. I had about 20 minutes alone on the summit of Everest. Now they've got these huge crowds, so it's really changed quite a lot. But 1988 was one of the last quiet years on Everest. And just the view looking in Tibet. And that's on the summit of Everest. And while I was on that trip, I was doing a fair bit of work just sort of helping out at a couple of the local medical clinics. And I found that most of the problems that people in Nepal were facing were really public health issues. There were problems with clean water, lack of vaccinations, poor diet. And the one unbelievable miracle I saw, I was working in one of the hospitals that Sir Edmund Hillary built, and Ed's been a hero of mine. Unfortunately, he passed away 2 years ago now. But he's one of my heroes, not so much for the climbing and exploration, but for what he's really given back. And he built schools, built hospitals, built clinics, and he worked sort of giving lectures to kind of keep his clinics going. And it was at one of his clinics where I saw the miracle of cataract surgery. And, in America, everybody, it's sort of a fairly routine thing. It's one of the best things we do in medicine. People start having a little trouble driving at night, they come get their cataracts fixed. But worldwide, there are 20 million people who can't see the shadow of a hand move across your face because of cataracts like this. And where I was working in Nepal, there was just kind of accepted that you get old, your hair turns white, your eye turns white, and then you die. And people get depressed, they shrivel up, and the family will kind of work hard trying to take care of them for a little while, but it becomes a huge burden when you're in a subsistence agrarian economy. Having a person who's blind is very difficult to care for. And it really takes another person out of the workforce or a child out of school to care for the blind person. And actually, a Nepali expression for a blind person is a mouth with no hands. And while I was there, a Dutch team came in and did surgery, and I saw people just blossom back to life. It was the most incredible miracle I'd ever seen. And I said, wow, Dr. Weidman was right, I should go into ophthalmology. And I got very lucky. I came back to the States and fell right into an ophthalmology residency. And this crisis is getting worse. The poorest of the poor, the number of people with cataracts in the poor areas of the world continues to grow. And there are 20 million blind at present, but it'll grow to 40 million by 2020. And these are blind. The World Health Organization calls someone blind when they can't do the functional acts of daily living. Here in America, we give benefits saying you're blind when you can see 2200. That's 2 lines down on the eye chart. You see the big E, you see the SL. You don't see the line below that. You get benefits of being legally blind. But these are people who are really functionally blind. And if we start thinking about operating in a place where people can stay in a job or go back to work, the number of people who need surgery, as I'll talk about in a few minutes, is much more. Well, I finished my residency. I was trying to figure out how do I get involved in international eye care. And one thing, when I had been in Nepal in 1988 and 89, I checked, and there was no one in the country doing modern cataract surgery with lens implants. And what I didn't know was that Sandik Ruit, who's the gentleman here, who was already the best trained ophthalmologist in Nepal, he trained at the All India Institute of Medical Sciences in Delhi, he had realized the need for the little intraocular lens implants to restore quality vision, and he had gone first to the Netherlands to train in microsurgery, and then from there to Australia to retrain with Professor Fred Hollows. And I began corresponding. And Fred Hollows, when I was a resident, was the only person who was really advocating you have to empower local people to do the work. You can't approach the world blindness situation by having American doctors go in on a mission and do 2 weeks of surgery. You really need to train whoever the best local person is. And I came over after I finished my residency to do a fellowship with Professor Hugh Taylor, who was Fred's protege and the chairman in Melbourne. I did a corneal transplantation fellowship, and he sent me over to work with Dr. Ruit. And I thought when I first went there I was going to kind of teach something, and I was going to be going to teach Nepali doctors. But I got there, I was just absolutely amazed. Dr. Ruit had kind of worked out this incredible system where he was delivering care in really remote areas, reaching out to the very poor people and doing very high volume surgery of full Western standard. And one thing that he and Fred came up with the idea of was building a factory to manufacture the little tiny lens implants, which at that time the least expensive in the world market were up around $200. And they began manufacturing lens implants in Kathmandu for $4, which instantly changed the whole market. And I went on an expedition with Dr. Ruit, sort of similar to a mountaineering expedition, except this time our teammates, instead of having Sherpas helping carry loads, this is a woman who had the old-style surgery where you remove the whole lens and then give the people the sort of thick Coke bottle-like glasses, which even in the best of situations caused huge distortions. Dr. Ruit had been part of a survey of blindness of Nepal, and they found the number 1 cause of blindness was cataract, but the number 2 cause of blindness were people who had this aphakic surgery and had lost their thick Coke bottle-like glasses. And the number 3 cause of blindness in Nepal were eyes that were rendered irrevocably blind from bad cataract surgery. So I came, and this was a lady who was totally blind, being led by her sister who had the aphakic surgery, is almost blind. We looked for people who had these white pupils, who did not have a relative afferent pupillary defect. All the people we operated on were completely blind. Dr. Ruit had already developed this system where, with face washing, antibiotics, but also copious betadine preps, he brought the infection rate, even in these remote settings, to that of what we have at our best hospitals in America. And for 3 days, Dr. Ruit and I worked side by side. We did 224 cataract surgeries, all on these absolute white cataracts. Sounds semi-impressive. You have 2 surgeons, 224 surgeries, 3 days, until you get the breakdown that Dr. Ruit did 201, while I did 23. And what was more, I had to call Dr. Ruit over to my table about 10 times out of my 23 cases to help me or get me out of trouble. But it was absolutely amazing. These are the lens implants that had just started to be manufactured in Nepal. This was in 1994. And the next day it was just absolutely overwhelming. We had 224 people who had been totally blind, had no expectation that they would see again, who now could see. And the families, just the whole everything. And then Dr. Ruit's whole system, the way he had the team approach where nobody does anything that somebody with lesser skills can do. You don't have trained nurses putting in eye drops. You don't have trained ophthalmic assistants walking blind people from one place to another. And he had this incredible system, and I went, wow, this is absolutely incredible. What can I do to help? And we don't have a lot of blindness in America. You know, we have legal blindness, about 3 per 1,000. Most of our blindness is from things we can't control. Our number one cause is age-related macular degeneration, where people lose their central vision. We can't do that much about it. In a lot of places in Africa, it's still about 3 per 100. And most of the leading causes of blindness are easily preventable or treatable. 85% of blindness on our planet could easily be prevented or treated. Children are lost to school and unable to join the workforce just because they can't get glasses. Older people can't do the acts of, daily living because they can't see up close because they can't get reading glasses. Then you have cataract glaucoma is now the next leading cause of blindness, a very difficult problem to approach in the developing world, particularly in Africa. But trachoma, onchocerciasis are both infectious blindness that can be easily preventable, and xerophthalmia, vitamin A deficiency. So cataract is still the number one cause of blindness, but the thing that's happening in a lot of the world, particularly in India and Asia, is that as we're starting to get better and doing more surgery and there are more surgeons, there are more people who can pay. India has a huge middle class and a huge upper middle class. China has a burgeoning middle class. And the problem is that the people who are truly blind are cocooned by the people who are working who can pay. And you have a taxi driver in Beijing, they want to pay for their cataract surgery. They want to have their cataract surgery like in America. They can't drive at night. You have people who are working jobs in factories. They have 2200 vision, what we would say legally blind. They'll pay for surgery. It's the real destitute people who are cocooned inside the ones who can pay. So even though the surgery rates in India are going up, the surgery rates in China are going up, the absolute blind is remaining static. The life expectancy is quite a bit lower. So I came back to Nepal to work pretty much full time. I worked with Dr. Ruid in Kathmandu for a couple months, and then I moved down to Biratnagar, and Dr. Ruid had me teaching at each of these sort of southern cities in Nepal where there were eye hospitals, teaching cataract surgery with lens implants. And we had a lot of cross-fertilization. There were some other really good programs. One of the very best is in the Tamil Nadu state of southern India, called the Aravind Eye Hospital System, which also started making the intraocular lenses, but also had very similar, very high volume, high flow way of doing things. And we've taken a lot from them. They took quite a bit from us. The Christoffel Blinden Mission, which is a faith-based group out of Germany, and also the SEVA Foundation. There were several other organizations working, but Dr. Ruid was the first in the region to really advocate that everyone needs an intraocular lens. And so basically I was teaching that surgery. This was my base hospital, rush hour traffic in Biratnagar in 1995, and teaching Dr. Ruid's technique. And our first step was teaching doctors to do better cataract surgery. And our focus was really on cataract surgery. But he also had the good sense to start a program for ophthalmic nurses, which is a one-year program after nursing school, and a program for ophthalmic assistants, which was a 3-year program after 11th grade, and a program for ophthalmic technicians, which is a 1-year program after 8th grade. And creating a system where we had these primary eye centers dotted through the hills, and then a skills transfer technique where we had this microsurgical course that we began. Dr. Ruid was the first doctor in Nepal to use a microscope and do microsurgery. We started a training course, but we also started a program where we did these high-volume cataract programs, and an experienced doctor would do the first eye on all of the patients. And then 3 days later, assuming everything went well, the training doctor would begin operating on the second eyes. And in the course of a 2 or 3 week skills transfer, the local doctors would do upwards of 100 cataract surgeries, as many as most residents do when they finish a 3-year program in America. And I'll show one quick video of a full cataract surgery. This is a slow one. This is me doing the surgery, so I can talk a little bit. We have a couple of surgeons. Actually, the highest volume surgeon in the world right now is one of people we trained. His name is Bidya Pant. He's at the Gita Hospital in southern Nepal. and he has several times done more than 200 in a single day. And he's coming to do a corneal transplant fellowship with us at the Mariana Eye Center. He'll be here September for 3 months. He's also doing training in Kathmandu. And what we've done, this is a lens of the eye, for those of you who are not ophthalmologists, kind of like a peanut M&M. And so we make a self-sealing incision into the eye wall, and then opening the outer candy shell, sort of opening the candy shell of the peanut M&M, and then using just fluidics, well, sort of float. This is completing the self-sealing incision. It's a little flap, and the fluid pressure inside the eye will seal this wound. And then we're going to move, use fluid pressure to bring the hard peanut out of the candy shell up into the front of the eye, so from behind the pupil. And then just use irrigation forces to irrigate it. Now this is a 27 gauge flow cannula, and guide the hard peanut out of the eye. And then irrigate out the chocolatey mess and suction out the chocolatey mess. And our results, we did a prospective randomized trial of this technique against sort of the state-of-the-art, very expensive technique I use here in America with an ultrasound to break up the lens. And at any time frame after 3 days, this technique, the statistical significance is 0 between the results of sort of the high marquee American surgeon David Chang and Dr. Rui's technique. In the first 3 days, this technique actually has better results in these absolute cataracts. And so when I came back to the States after my time in Nepal in 1995, Dr. Rui and I set up a program called the Himalayan Cataract Project, which we kind of sort of really to develop the infrastructure and work really through education. And we made a mistake, I think, just with our name, calling it the Himalayan Cataract Project. By the time cataracts seemed like such an overwhelming thing, there were about 200,000 estimated blind people from cataracts in Nepal, about 40,000 new people going blind a year, and only 15,000 cataracts a year being performed. And what we'd been doing was just teaching doctors to do better cataract surgery. And the next thing we did was take some of our best young cataract surgeons and send them abroad, send them either to America or Australia for subspecialty training. And once we trained a retinal specialist, a corneal specialist, glaucoma specialist, and the full array of subspecialists, we then started a full residency program. At the same time, we grew our ophthalmic assistant and ophthalmic technician program and started a whole series of primary eye centers dotted throughout the Himalaya. Again, we were using these high-volume cataract camps for skill transfer, and the results in Nepal have been pretty much overwhelming. I was just speaking to Doug in the back about, I just got back from Nepal a couple of weeks ago, and I'm unfortunately not really needed. I just slow them down now. You know, the last year in Nepal, they did over 220,000 cataract surgeries. A lot of that's a little bit deceptive because the cataract surgery quality is so good now, a lot of people stream across the border from India. The Bihar state of India is still a little bit behind, so we have several very high-volume hospitals on the border of Nepal and India, which do primarily Indian patients. But the quality is uniformly really good. And I was just with Dr. Rui at a fairly remote area where we went to one of our primary eye care centers and did a big cataract program. And had we been there 10 years ago, everyone would have been blind. If somebody could see to count my fingers at 10 feet or 15 feet, we'd say, oh, no, Grandpa, your vision's pretty good. Maybe you can get your surgery in another year. Because we had such an overwhelming number of people who were blind waiting for surgery. This time we did a couple hundred surgeries. We had 5 blind patients. Our typical patient had really good cataract surgery in one eye and had blurry vision now in the other eye and wanted their second eye done. We had, both myself and Dr. Rui, we had both had a phacoemulsification machine, and any immature, less than absolute cataract, I was doing phacoemulsification. I probably did 70% of my cases with the phacoemulsification. And this is our new, we had a USAID grant to expand our main center. And this is our main teaching institute, Toganga Institute of Ophthalmology. We're doing a lot of research, doing a really high volume of surgery. We're able to have it completely self-sustaining. We pay our doctors a very good wage for Nepal. We pay our nurses more than most nurses make, our technicians more, the people who sweep up. We have about 60% free care, and about 25% are now currently paying for phacoemulsification, and 15% are paying something between. And with the high volume and the high flow and bringing the incremental costs down, we're able to be self-sustaining with the free care. We're now starting our own subspecialty fellowships. We're using it as a training center for Africa. We have an eye bank, and it's unfortunate that the corneal surgeons are out come and demonstrate what's currently state of the art. And what I'm doing here, and it'll take me an hour, and then I'll come back 6 months later, and Dr. Rita Garung will be doing the same surgery I taught her, a little bit better. That takes me an hour. She'll be doing it in 35 minutes. So I've sort of unfortunately become a little bit obsolete in Nepal. We have ophthalmic assistants who do a lot of the workup. If you have healthy eyes, they do a lot of the exam. They do the local anesthetic. This is our eye bank. We have the only temple-based eye bank. And when the eye bank was first started, there was a shortage of corneas because, one, people don't usually die in the hospital, and two, the counselors and people who asked for the donations weren't getting a very good response because there's this idea that you'd be sending your loved one blind into their reincarnation. So Dr. Ruiz had the great idea to move the eye bank to Pashupatinath Temple, and we have Hindu priests and Buddhist monks explaining that this last act of kindness will enhance their loved one's reincarnation, and by simply removing the little contact lens on the front of the eye, they will improve their afterlife. We started working in Tibet in 1997. For whatever reasons, it's sort of multifactorial, the sort of bit genetic, bit the lack of antioxidants in the diet, the intense UV light exposure at high altitude, and then also the lack of care. When we started, there was no one doing cataract surgery in Tibet. We've now trained 32 doctors in Tibet, and we have a training center. We have a Lhasa Eye Institute that's now self-sustaining and doing very good quality surgery. This is a woman in her 20s who had gone blind in early age from her cataracts, and in the far picture she's crying, seeing her baby for the first time. Started working in northern Pakistan. We brought a doctor from northern Pakistan to Nepal for training, came back to do our first high-volume camp, and we had a bit of resistance because the local Ayatollah said we were going to put Christian eyes in, referring to little lens implants. So what we did is we bought 50 Holy Korans, and the first 50 lucky cataract candidates each got a Holy Koran, which they held in their hand while they were getting their surgery, and the first thing they saw with their new Christian eyes was a Koran. And Dr. Niaz Ali is now doing about 700 cataracts a year in Skardu. So working in Bhutan in 1999, that's been just an incredible pleasure. The lead doctor there, Kunveng Getchen, is really a very forward-thinking person, and it's a small country and a government that was focused initially on getting a good infrastructure of roads and primary education, primary health care, which we've been able to dovetail with. They have the former king, his son, he's just abdicated to his son, but he's the one who coined the famous catchphrase that he wants to realize the gross national happiness of his country, not the gross national product. And they have this wonderful sort of combination of traditional and Western care. You go to their national referral hospital, and one wing is of traditional medicine. So if you have a headache or chronic indigestion, you go to the traditional wing, and if you have a cataract or appendicitis, you go to the Western wing. And we've been able to create a very good, with the help of one of my partners at the Marian Eye Hospital, Bob Hoffman, who's a pediatric ophthalmologist, a really wonderful childhood blindness program with full vitamin A distribution to every child in the country, every child being checked for spectacles, and then we have been working on eliminating corneal infections by having every basic health unit, which they have for every village, the workers trained to recognize early corneal abrasions and treat with antibiotics. Dr. Ruiz started working in North Korea in 2005. There was just a National Geographic special that's been airing quite a bit about Dr. Ruiz and the program. But we've now trained 8 doctors and 16 nurses from North Korea and Nepal. And so actually Asia is doing really well. India has some great programs. I mentioned the Aravind system, but there's also the there are about 5 or 6 phenomenal blindness prevention programs in India that are really improving the quality throughout the country. China's beginning to get better. The one place in Asia that's still a big problem is Indonesia, but we're starting to work a little bit in Indonesia. And when I just left Nepal, we had 4 Indonesian doctors who had just come to Telangana for training. But Africa is still the continent of blindness. There's a lot of infectious blindness still. Trachoma is really a disease of close quarters, poor hygiene, lack of clean water, and just washing kids' faces will eliminate trachoma. The problem is that when somebody has to walk for 30 minutes and then walk back for 45 minutes with a pot on their head of water to convince them they have to use some of that water to clean a face is a very difficult thing. And similarly, river blindness is still endemic in quite a few places. The problem is that in the places where it's endemic, the problem is just getting it in distribution in Darfur, South Sudan, Sierra Leone, Liberia, Ivory Coast, Angola. A lot of these places are having political difficulties, and even though the Merck is now giving away unlimited amounts of the medications that are necessary, and Pfizer is giving away azithromycin, which wipes out trachoma very quickly, the problem is just getting it to the people who need it. And the other big problem is manpower. And it's not just the doctors, but in most of sub-Saharan Africa now, there's 1 ophthalmologist per million population. And that's very deceptive. I've been working quite a bit in Ethiopia the last couple of years, and Ethiopia has 80 ophthalmologists for 77 million people. But the problem is over 50 of them live in Addis Ababa. And when you train and you work hard and become a doctor, to go to remote areas is very difficult. And the other big manpower issue, which in India, in Nepal, we've been able to really do very well with the paramedical staff and nursing. The paramedical and nursing populations in Africa are quite a bit worse. And a lot of the places that have rural hospitals with an eye doctor, they work alone. They don't even have a single nurse. It's a child with bilateral cataracts. And so our goal is really we've been trying to expand the Himalayan Cataract Project and working with a lot of other organizations that are working in Africa. We're sort of skewing ourselves now to call it cureblindness.org. Our website is www.cureblindness.org because the cataract problem in the Himalaya, we're so far ahead of where I thought we would be when we started the program 15 years ago. And starting to work at the Moran, we have a division of international ophthalmology, and we're really starting to focus on how we can work to create a similar system to what is existing in Nepal and India into places in Africa. This is from a Maasai song, Maeu na Maduku, I don't want to be a blind man. This is one of my partners, Alan Crandall, who's been working, prior to my coming to Utah, he'd been working for about 10 years already in Ghana. And we just had a memorandum of understanding between University of Utah Medical School and the National Medical School in Ghana for several departments, infectious disease, anesthesia, as well as pediatrics, and then, of course, ophthalmology. And there's still a lot of bilateral blindness there. The 3 countries that I'm really focusing on to try and create a center of excellence for which we hope will be a training center and expand outward are Ethiopia, Ghana, and Rwanda. But I'm also working a little bit with UN Millennium Development Villages Project. We're doing a survey of blindness in arguably 12 of the most destitute places on the planet and trying to do an economic assessment. One of the Millennium Development Villages Project, sort of the brainchild between Kofi Annan, the former Secretary General of the UN, and an economist named Jeffrey Sachs. And we have a sort of looking at the economic impact of blindness in these poorest communities and seeing how it's impediment to both the family and then the community and then development at large. And there's a very good PhD candidate in economics at Columbia who's working with us on this. And again, our focus is on education. We're starting to take doctors, we're doing joint fellowships, taking doctors from Africa, sending them to Nepal or India for part of their fellowship, doing usually 9 months of surgical training in Nepal or India, and then 3 months at the Moran. And you still see this a lot. I mean, you go to places, and this is in northern Ghana, where the blindness rate is more than 3 per 100. We've been working in the UN Millennium Villages Project. And blindness is one of the things that we can overcome. Cataract blindness in particular is something we can definitely overcome. And although we're having a little bit of success in Asia, lots of work left in Africa. This is one day's post-op in Tibet a couple of years ago. And I really want to thank you all very, very much for inviting me. And it's a great honor to talk to you. And I'll be happy to answer questions as long as anyone would like on any topics from climbing to height. Yes, sir. You know, it was asked, how was I able to carry on in Nepal during the Civil War? And it actually was relatively easy. Dr. Ruid is so well known. He's kind of like a national hero. He's won the Asian of the Year from Reader's Digest magazine Asia. He won the Ramon Magsaysay Award, which is kind of the Asian equivalent of the Nobel Peace Prize. And when we would go to places that were occupied by the Maoists, they would take credit. They would say, here we are, we're bringing in these eye services, the government didn't do anything. And when we go to a place that was still occupied by the government, they'd say, oh, we're bringing you eye services. Dr. Rui was extremely good at walking the line and remaining apolitical. And he's really the genius behind everything we do. I mean, my role, to a large extent, has been the enthusiastic fat boy who plays because I bring the ball. And we really didn't have a lot of trouble. And the only problem is on cost recovery, and the economy of Nepal has been devastated. The political situation in Nepal is still horrible. Kathmandu used to be such a lovely city, and it's really a mess. There's no garbage collection. The streets haven't been widened. The streets haven't been repaired. Electricity is sporadic, and that has been a big problem. You know, one of the problems we're facing in Nepal now is just continuing our cost recovery as the percentage of paying. We actually have a couple of problems in Nepal, but they don't have to as much to do with the political as, again, our continuing success. Our residency program has been so good that we've turned out a lot of very good ophthalmologists, and unfortunately, we've been kind of keeping the cream of the cream in our own system, giving them fellowships, and they're the leaders at our hospitals. But a lot of doctors want to stay in Kathmandu, and we have several of our trainees who've now opened private cataract centers in Kathmandu just in the last couple of years. And we still do about 90% of the free surgery in the Kathmandu Valley, but the percentage of paying patients has gone down a little bit because there are other centers that are giving the sort of VIP concierge service doing equally good cataract surgery. I mean, we're doing really high quality, so we can't really kind of argue you have to come to Telganga. But at the same time, the number of people who can pay is getting a little bit smaller because the economy is so bad. So that's been the biggest problem for us with the Civil War. But the whole Civil War, the U.S. press kind of tends to magnify a lot of things. And in the whole war, there's been one outsider who was a Russian who was kind of in the wrong place at the wrong time, who had a leg injury. But other than that, it really hasn't been much of a problem. Kind of a long-winded answer on that. Any other questions? Yeah. Almost none. We do it with local anesthesia, and we've had very, very few, sudden cardiac incidents. I mean, really, we don't do much of a workup. We check the blood pressure. If the blood pressure is, 220 over 160, we'll give them medicine to lower the blood pressure. We won't do the surgery. We check their blood sugar and really do almost minimal medical checks. And it's such a dramatic thing with people who are blind. Yeah. I'm sorry, say that a little bit louder again. We really haven't been, our own program, we haven't been doing much outside of ophthalmology. And even things, like the public health measures of vitamin A distribution, distributing azithromycin to entire communities. We've been kind of helping facilitate that, but the main focus of the program, our program, has really been teaching surgical and medical ophthalmology. There are a couple of dental programs that have sort of been kind of following our example a little bit, but really we've been mainly just trying to focus on eye care. Yeah.
Just a comment, as we hear a lot about what's happening in the world, Middle East, Afghanistan and such, and the contrast between humanitarian aid and military aid, I applaud people like yourself who represent our country in a way that shows the true humanitarian giving and does things that are, I think, unimaginable.
Oh, thanks.
It's great.
I've said quite a bit. For the cost of one bomb, we could do so much. I wish our government would get more on board with programs like this. Well, thank you all very much. Does anyone, any of the remaining Lowe family here? I know anyways, I would like to just, I know George Lowe Sr. passed away a few years ago, but it's really been an honor to come and speak in Ogden. Thanks.